Let's get to our first topic of discussion today. The importance of effective mediation processes cannot be overstated in a business world marked by conflict and division. This is because mediation offers a unique and effective approach to resolving conflict and alternative dispute resolution through communications and negotiations. While mediation is a versatile tool that can be applied to a wide range of disputes, experts say its true power lies in the ability to transform relationships, build understanding, and pave the way for sustainable conflict resolution. What are the ways we can achieve seamless mediation processes across all strata? Let's get talking. I'm being joined by the lead mediator at Raffles Mediation Chambers Limited, Franca Cambella. Thank you so much. It's good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Tolu. I'm delighted to be on your program.
Thank you. Let's start with, what is mediation? Why mediation?
Of course. So as you pointed out, mediation is an alternative dispute resolution mechanism.
Yes.
And what it is a process where two or more disputing parties come together, and with the help of a neutral third-party mediator, they try to resolve their dispute amicably. And it's a process that is without prejudice, and that's confidential, and that happens quite quickly. And then at the end of it, through the help of the mediator who guides the process but has no decision-making power, hopefully the parties come to a resolution, and that settlement agreement, which is the result of the resolution, is then legally enforceable. And the litigation would then, after a few procedures, would go away.
It's a good way to start the conversation, but I really want to understand further, like, to you practicing, what are the merits really of an effective mediation process? And of course, is it applicable in all cases to dispute resolutions?
Of course. To answer your many questions there, so it's applicable in all kinds of litigation matters. So it could be commercial matters, contracts, technology, artificial intelligence, employee-employer relationships, even matrimonial cases. Mediation can be applicable in all areas. The merits of mediation are many. Firstly, we all know how much time and money litigation costs. If you go to court with a matter, you're there probably for a number of years. And it's not just time spent in court, but it's loss of opportunity cost, because the time you would otherwise be growing your business, you have to spend in court litigating another party.
Yeah.
So it saves you time. It saves you money, because most mediations are done with in a short period of time. In fact, most of the mediations I do, we try to complete in a day. And of course, there's some prep time before that where we do some pre-mediation sessions, but the actual mediations, many of them end in a day, and then it's over. So there's time savings, there's cost savings. And then, as you correctly pointed out, the parties are able to have a relationship after that, because the resolution is something they've come to together amicably.
Agree on.
They've agreed to it together. So it's possible to continue the relationship, and that's a huge thing.
Really huge, really huge. I just got that part, because when you go to court, there is this belief here that you don't come back and being friends.
Absolutely not. In most cases, yes. And it's just that, it's not just that. It's when you go to court, really, the judge is at the mercy of what you've submitted.
True.
And won't know the whole story, whereas in mediation, you have the ability to air everything out. And often we start a mediation thinking that the issue is one thing, but then when we hear all the parties' story, when we hear the background, the context, then we realize that there are other issues that weren't apparent beforehand that have come out. And we're able to look at those and resolve those, as well as some of the main legal problems. So you get a chance to air everything out. And, hopefully through doing that and coming to a resolution, you can continue the relationship.
Interestingly, now, let's talk about the process involved. Could you take us through this process?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing in starting the process is that the parties have to have a willingness to want to mediate. So there has to be a willingness to want to try and resolve this amicably. So the first step would be to selecting a mediator, a professionally trained and neutral mediator. I often hear people say, oh, my lawyer is going to be the mediator. You can't do that because the lawyer is already representing one party and can't be a neutral mediator. So it's the selection of the mediator which is very, very important in the process. Once a mediator is selected, then what I usually do is have pre-mediation sessions where I not only read all the court papers and background papers, but I sit with each of the parties privately and hear their story and understand really what their concerns are, what their interests are beforehand. And then, you know, at that stage, sometimes I say to the parties, maybe you should take a little bit more time before we do the mediation, especially if I see they're very emotional, which can really hurt a mediation if a party comes very angry and not able to sit down and, you know, come to a resolution. And then at that point, we also set up a date for mediation. And as I said earlier, it's usually a one-day session. We try to finish in a day. It doesn't always work. Sometimes we need to come back. But the good thing about mediation is it's tailored to the needs of the parties. So if we need more time, we take more time. During the mediation session, each party starts off by talking about, they make an initial statement, and they talk about the case as they see it. Then, once each party has done that, we do some brainstorming. Then I separate the parties and we talk about how we can reach agreements, what are the possibilities of the agreements, to reach an agreement, sorry. Then we bring the parties back together, and then we start going through all the possible solutions, and hopefully by the end of the day, we have a settlement. And once the settlement is finalized, and usually the lawyers who are present will help draft a settlement, and the parties sign it, that settlement then becomes enforceable, like any other contract. But the beauty also of mediation is that everything that is said during the mediation is on a without prejudice basis, so it can't be held against you, and it's also confidential. So the process itself is confidential without prejudice, but once you sign the agreement at the end, that agreement has the force of any other contract.
Sounds very beautiful, but tell us what's your most difficult aspect of mediation?
Yeah, I think one of the most difficult aspects is when there are a lot of emotions involved.
Yeah.
And that can be in any context, even in a business context. I did a big mediation where it was a big merger and acquisition, and the price was at stake, and one party was insulted because the other party dared say it was worth so little, and it was worth really so much. So emotions coming into play. When there are relationships that have broken down. For example, I did a very big one that involved a succession. And it was, you know, the father trying to give his empire to his children. And there was a lot of emotion and a lot of fighting, quite like the show we see on Netflix. So when there are a lot of emotions involved, that's when it becomes very, very difficult. And that's often when I ask for a timeout, or maybe we take a bit of time and then come back another time.
So let's look at biggest, or what are the biggest obstacles you've seen going into mediation? In other words, what are more parties doing it?
Right. I think one of the biggest obstacles is the lack of information of what mediation is. And I think more people would be using mediation effectively if they understood the process, and if their lawyers talked to them about it, their service providers, if there was more information out there in the community about what mediation is. So that's a huge obstacle. The other obstacle is the willingness to want to resolve the issues. And if you force people to mediation, sometimes it works, but often, you know, they come away disgruntled, unhappy because they've been forced to do it. And, you know, in those cases, sometimes they won't adhere by the signed settlement agreement because they were forced to do it. So some of the obstacles are a lack of knowledge, being forced to do it, not being ready to do it. And I think that there's a lot of information that we can put out there. We can talk about it more, maybe train more mediators. So those are some of the obstacles that I see right now in the space.
What are the limitations of a mediation process?
Right. So as I said earlier, a huge limitation is that it has to be voluntary.
Oh, yes.
You know, and so if it's not voluntary and people are forced, then you are very much limited. Another limitation, and I've seen this unfortunately, is a mediator that's not 100% neutral. And this is why it's very, very important to choose not only a mediator who's trained, but somebody who is truly neutral. And isn't going to guide the process in one way or the other. Another limitation is sometimes there's an expectation that we mediators will give advice. We don't give advice. That's something the lawyers do. We're only there to guide and manage the process and help the parties resolve. But we're not there to give advice, and sometimes parties want it. And in those cases, I will revert to the lawyers, and I'll say, you might want to get advice on this from your lawyers. We also are not decision makers. You know, we don't decide for the parties, but what we sometimes can do is we can give examples. We can say, well, in this situation, the parties resolved the matter going this way, or you might want to try this, but we can in no way decide for them, unlike arbitrators or judges. So it's a very, very specific process, and you know there are some limitations to it.
Well, I've heard of the United Nations Convention on International Settlements Agreement resulting from mediation. It's also called the Singapore Convention on Mediation. Well, I have some questions around this.
Yes.
What is it? Why is it useful? And is Nigeria a party to this? How does it work?
Right, of course. So it's commonly called the Singapore Convention on Mediation.
Yeah.
It was presented in 2019. And what it does is it allows for parties from different countries that have reached a mediated agreement, and if there should be an issue with enforcement, to very easily go to the court in the other country, present the agreement, and it will be automatically enforced if countries are party to the Singapore Convention. And so this is a way to facilitate trade and business, because if there's a conflict and you have a resolution, it's easily enforced. And to your question, yes, Nigeria was one of the original signatories in 2019. And not only did it sign, but it ratified the convention in November of last year, and it's coming into force this month on the 27th. So Nigeria has done all the steps that it needs to be part of the convention. And one way it will work, if I can just give an example in practical terms, let's say a Nigerian company and an American company have a dispute that they resolved through mediation. And let's say that after everything, the American company doesn't follow the contract, doesn't follow the settlement agreement, then the Nigerian company can take that and file it in an American court and have it enforced. Very simple procedure. But there's also a flip side. If the Nigerian side doesn't comply, then the American side could do the same.
Yeah.
Have it done, have it enforced quite quickly. So it's a very, very useful convention. So far, 59 countries have signed.
Wow.
And many of them are in Africa. And the superpowers like India, China, United States, UK, they're all signatories. So it was really very much a game changer in the field of cross-border mediations.
That makes real sense. Let's talk a bit about Raffles Mediation Chambers Limited. What are your plans looking forward?
Right. Well, I recently founded Raffles Mediation Chambers here in Lagos, and I've been mediating for over 20 years. I first started in my country of Canada, and then I was also trained in Singapore and in the UK. And I'm also on the panel of the United Nations WIPO panel of mediators. So my idea was to start a mediation chamber and to also bring in other mediators locally to collaborate when there are big mediations, and we need more than one mediator. But eventually, I'd also like to have a training center to train mediators locally. So we're in early days, but we have big plans.
I really wish you all the best. Well, just on a lighter note, you have been a Niger wife for 31 years. I said I was going to ask that to just wrap up this conversation. With vibrant careers everywhere abroad and all, and you and your husband relocated to Lagos Tell me, what people would also want to know, tell us, how did this happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So people often ask me, you're Canadian, you're coming here.
What sort of confidence do you have in this country?
Absolute confidence. You know, it was a promise I made my husband 31 years ago that one day we would come, and the time had come to come, and it's really a reflection of the confidence that we have in Nigeria. We think that things are coming together, and with proper organization, et cetera, this can be a real powerhouse, and we want to be here to ride the train and to be part of it, to be part of the transformation. So we have a lot of confidence in what's happening here, and it's a good time to be here. And we hope that we can both contribute in a meaningful way.
Beautiful. I like that. And Nigerians should please listen. There is still confidence here in our country. Your social media handle, maybe we could just share that if you don't mind as we wrap up.
Yes. So we do have a website, rafflesmediation.com. LinkedIn, look under my name, Franca Ciambella. Email addresses, all the information is there. Instagram is there. And as I said, we're early days, but we're moving ahead.
I must thank you so much for your time. Franca Ciambella, she is the lead mediator at Raffles Mediation Chambers Limited. Thank you so much for coming on Business Nigeria.
Thank you so much for having me,
Interesting chat with you, I must say.
Thank you very much.
And I'm talking to Andrew after this.
I know.
I know that.
We know each other.
All right, then. I know that.
Thank you.
All right, then. Enjoy the rest of your day. Coming up next on the show, implications of high energy.